Hi, everyone, and welcome. Terry Real is a nationally recognized family therapist, author, and teacher. He's particularly known for his groundbreaking work on male psychology. I Don't Want to Talk About It was the first book ever written, in fact, about male depression. I'm really excited to share his wisdom from his new book called Us, Getting Past You and Me to Build a More Loving Relationship. And it's a New York Times bestseller. It's incredibly interesting and important. So I'm really excited to welcome Terry Real. Hi, Terry.
Hi, Katie. It's such a pleasure to be here with you.
Well, thank you. Let's start off. We have so much ground to cover. Let's just get right to it, Terry. I
Okay.
want to start off by defining trauma. I think a lot of people think of trauma as a major catastrophe in one's life, abuse, addiction, being in a terrible accident, witnessing something, a horrific life event. But that's not always the case.
No.
Trauma comes in all shapes and sizes. Can you explain that?
Well, in the field, we talk about big T trauma, which is everything you just named, catastrophes, incest, floods, whatever, combat. But we also talk about little T trauma. I talk about relational trauma. And think about water on a rock. This is not one catastrophic thing that happens to you. This is the misattunements or the demeaning, controlling things or the neglectful things that are smaller, but that happen every day over and over and over again throughout your entire developing childhood. I show a tape to my students of a man who was sexually molested by his aunt at 7, but the trauma that got activated in his marriage was the abandonment of having no one to tell. His mom was a drug addict. His father was irresponsible. And even though we normally think of trauma as a sexual abuse, which it is, it was also what was going on in this young boy's life the other 364 days of the year.
So, Terry, what you're saying is he had a big T trauma dealing with abuse, but he also had, well, maybe a big T or little T trauma, probably a big T trauma by his parents not acknowledging it or not being heard, which reflected and had implications later in his life. We all, I guess, Terry, seem to be the product of how we were raised.
Yeah.
And we're often torn between our adaptive child and wise adult, which you talk about in your book. What do you mean by the adaptive child?
Yeah, this is the core idea of the book and of my work. What I call the wise adult part of us, prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that is the most mature, that develops last in us, the part of the brain that developed last in us as a species, doesn't develop until 26 years old in kids growing up. This is present based. It's the part of us we're talking to right now. Um, Here and now, non-triggered, able to stop and think, deliberate, observe, make mature decisions. Unfortunately, that's not the only part of us that's up all the time. As a couples therapist, my first question is, which part of you am I speaking to? Am I speaking to this wise adult, or am I speaking to an immature part of you that's been triggered by trauma? And we speak about the wounded child part, very young, very reactive, the part of you that just received the abuse or the neglect and tends to be the wounded. When I do imaginative work with clients and they get into the wounded child, they just want to crawl up on someone's lap and cry for about 1,000 years. They're just flooded. Between these two, and where most of my clients have lived most of their lives, thinking that it's an adult, but it's not, is what I call the adaptive child. This is the part of you that adapted, the part of you that learned to do whatever made most sense to you growing up in the face of that neglect, emotional neglect, or violation that you had to deal with. And we think of this as our adult self, but it's really a kid's version of what an adult looks like.
Give me a couple of examples, Terry, to make this even more sort of understandable. Let's say you were neglected and you talk about this really painful video, which I'm going to watch on YouTube, that shows a parent really just kind of neglecting her child and how that child responds with anger and, all kind of all various emotions. But let's say you were neglected as a kid,
Mhm.
and how does that manifest itself when you're an adult?
Well, to understand this, Katie, you have to understand the nature of trauma. There's no such thing as trauma memory. That's a lie. That's a misnomer. You don't remember trauma, you relive it. Your body is back. So the combat vet who's walking down Main Street and hears a car backfire and spins around like he's got a gun in it, he's not thinking, oh, I'm walking down Main Street remembering combat. Main Street is gone. He's back, his body is back in combat. There's a superimposition of past and present that leaves you fundamentally confused. You're back there. And then you respond with these automatic knee jerk responses, which are the characteristic of the adaptive child is it's automatic and knee jerk. And I have three of them, by the way. Your listeners can out themselves. Maybe we will. Fight, flight, or fix. Fight, screw me, screw you. I'm a fighter. Belinda's a fighter. We grew up in violent homes. Forget it. I'm also a New Yorker, so what can I say? Uh, Fleer, and you can flee 6 inches away from somebody. That's called stonewalling. And fix is not the adult, let me see if I can do something to make things better between us. It's a compulsive, anxious, a codependent. Oh my God, you're upset. I can't be at peace unless you're not. Let me do whatever, twist myself into it. That's fixing. So, Katie, if you will, I'm a fighter. You want to say what you are? I know that you're in your wise adult 364 days out of the year, but that one day, where would you go?
Probably a fixer because I'm a pleaser as the youngest of four kids. And I always tried, I think I always tried to make people happy. And so I definitely am a fixer, but it's born out of insecurity that if I fix somebody, they'll like me.
They'll like you, yeah. And underneath that is abandonment fear. They'll like you, and if they don't like you, the consequences are going to be neglected somehow, being the
Yeah.
young of four. So that takes us back to your initial question. If somebody has emotional neglect, or even the threat of emotional neglect in their childhood, what happens is something in the present is close enough to what happened to you as a kid, like that combat vet down Main Street. You get triggered, and you're back there. So I was just dealing with a couple this morning. Every time the woman, who tends to be a bit of a distancer, pulls away and distances from this guy, he had neglect, emotional neglect as a child. And he doesn't just feel, oh man, I'm lonely. He feels abandoned
And
and,
desperate.
and desperate and goes after her, and often goes after her angrily, demandingly, which of course is a vicious cycle. It just pushes her further, but it's a self fulfilling prophecy. So I had to say to this guy, let me tell you something. Adults don't get abandoned. Unless you're dropped off on a desert island, adults get left. It hurts to get left. You can feel rejected. You can feel alone. But abandon is, oh, the air has been sucked out of my, I'm going to die. Children get abandoned. When your wife pulls away from you, you are not aware of it, but what gets reactivated in you is a child ego state. You get desperate. You feel like you must go after her. And let me help you calm that little boy down so you don't have to. Can I give
And
you?
I was going to say, she also obviously is a bad combination with him. If she puts up walls, that's not particularly helpful to somebody who has those kinds of fears, right?
Well, it's only helpful in the deepest mystical sense that it will give him the opportunity to heal and fix all that. I have a saying: we all marry our unfinished business. There were women who did not put up walls, who did not blip on this guy's screen. We all falling in love means this person's going to heal us and I'm going to be fine. A real relationship means this person is exquisitely designed to throw me right back into the soup. That's not a bad relationship. We all do that. That what makes for a good relationship is what happens then. And if I can let go of my adaptive response and remember the wise adult part of me, I can do something different in that old drama. And then they may do something different in that old drama. And that's what's healing. Like when this guy can soothe his own little boy, that will heal his trauma.
How does he do that? I mean, I'm just curious. He's deeply insecure and has this reaction when he feels like he might be abandoned. So, how does he heal himself? Because you
Well,
talk about befriending and
yeah.
the importance of befriending some of your issues, acknowledging them and accepting them and kind of understanding them with compassion. So, how does he do that?
Well, I actually personified these early child states. I would say to this guy, I will in our next session. I'll say, when you get into that frightened, abandoned place, can you feel that in your body? Yeah, where it's, oh, my chest, a butterfly. Okay, go into the butterflies. How old are you right now? I'm 4. Tell me about that 4-year-old. He's playing by himself and his parents are off, blah, blah, blah. I want to meet that 4-year-old. Bring him up out of your body and put him in a chair and let's talk to him. And I do. I have people separate from their early child states, get to know them, put their arms around them, befriend them, and chill them out. I like to say when an inner child kicks up, which is just a personification of these early states, when an inner child kicks up, put your arms around them, put them on your lap, hear them out, love them up, and take their sticky hands off the steering wheel. They're not driving the bus, you are. So he is not feeling like he's going to die. That little boy part of him is feeling like he's going to die. A little separation and a little befriending of that boy, and he can learn how to soothe himself. Can I give you another quick
Sure.
example? I like to tell a story. So this is on the other side, different kind of abuse. So a guy comes to me on the brink of divorce, wife about to leave him. He's a chronic liar, lies about everything. And he's one of these guys. I say the sky's blue. He says, well, it's aquamarine. He won't give it. He's got a black belt in evasion. That's his adaptive child. He's an evader. I know that's his adaptive child. The wise adult is not a pathological liar. He was adapting to something. So I say, who were you adapting to? Who tried to control you growing up? I ask. And he says, sure enough, his dad. Show me the thumbprint. I'll tell you about the thumb. Show me the adaptation. And I ask, who were you adapting to? Military man, how he ate, how he drank, totally. What did you do with this controlling father? He looks at me and smiles. That's important, that smile. That's resistance. And he says to me, I lied. Brilliant. What a brilliant little boy. I teach my students always be respectful of the exquisite intelligence of that adaptive child. You did exactly what you needed to do back then to preserve your wholeness and integrity. Beautiful. You lied. But I
What?
have
Why did he lie? That why did he lie, Terry?
He lied because if he told his father the truth, his father would have owned him, controlled every aspect of his life, who his friends were, what he dressed, his father was an utterly controlling guy. So he would befriend Harry over here, but he would lie about it to his father and protect his autonomy, protect his freedom and his friendship. It was a brilliant strategy with this overly controlling father. But his wife is not his father. He's not that little boy. So we float all this. And then They come into the true story. They come in 2 weeks later, hand in hand, problem solved. I say, okay, there's a tail here. Tell me what happened. That weekend, she sent him to the grocery store to get 12 things. He shows up with 11. Where's the pumpernickels? She says. He says, every muscle and nerve in my body was screaming to say they were out of it. And I thought of you. I took a breath. I looked my wife in the eye and I said, I forgot. True story. She burst into tears and she said, I've been waiting for this moment for 25 years. That's recovery. That's the way out of this mess. That's what we're looking for.
And that's repair, which we'll talk about in a moment. But I also thought it was interesting. You talked about in the book over parenting, and that can also have a very negative effect. Putting too much, I mean, lifting up the child too much, putting that child on a pedestal, um, kind of making that child feel too special.
Yeah.
How can that have a negative impact on a child when that child becomes an adult?
Yeah. Well, we're all a little guilty of it. We're an indulgent generation. My kids went to a hothouse little school, and my son, who's very funny, said, Shady Hill, where no one loses, you just win differently.
And that's also part of the culture too that exists now, and sort of honestly, when I was raising my daughters as well, everybody gets a trophy, we're all, worthy, et cetera, et cetera. But explain sort of what that can do to a child.
Well, within range is fine. It's just whatever. But it's a mistake about what self-esteem is. Self-esteem comes from the inside out. You have worth because you're here and you're a human being, and your worth is no better or worse than anybody else's. This is what democracy is. One person, one vote. We're all equal under the law. We're equal. Um, we mistake that and think of self-esteem as competence, learning to master something. That's fine. That has its place, but that's got nothing to do with self-esteem. Self-esteem is unconditional. There are two forms of self-esteem disorder. Shame, feeling inferior, has been a preoccupation for psychology and self-help for 50 years. I also deal with grandiosity, the other self-esteem disorder, not too little, too much, superiority, entitlement, being contemptuous, being above the rules. And believe me, working with men and working with relationships, you have to know how to help people come down from the one up as well as up from the one down. You have to do both. So being one up in your relationship can do a lot of damage, yelling, screaming, demanding sex, being entitled, being irresponsible, being above the rules. These are all one up things. The psychology is all but ignored. The roots of being one up can either be what we all think of as somebody's one up because they're escaping insecurity. Um, grandiose political figures were really insecure. Bullies are really insecure. Maybe there's an interesting study. Half of narcissists are escaping insecurity. The other half just think they're better than you or me. And that comes from false empowerment, from pumping up a child. And it goes way beyond trophies. I wrote this in the book. What's the most destructive phrase in the English language? Honey, you understand me better than your father. That is no favor. That's psychological incest. Uh, when I
That's
keep,
so interesting.
yeah, pumping up a child's grandiosity sets them up to be insensitive, superior, unempathic when they're adults. And it's part of our.
What other kinds of messages do kids get that cause them this sense of grandiosity later in life?
Well, you don't only have to pump it. Well, you're the hero. You're the light of my life. You're the star of the family. But you just have to not break. We have to socialize these little characters. I'll tell you, when my son was 3, 4, he had his first play date. And being in Boston, it sounded like my son's got ADHD, and it sounded like this. Hey, you want to play hockey? How about hockey? You want to throw a stick? How about some? And the kid leaves, and Justin comes bounding up to me and says, "Did you have fun?" And I go, "No." And he's stunned. And I go, "Justin, let me teach you something. When you invite a kid into your world, you have to pay attention to what they want to do." And he looks at me, he goes, "Too much hockey, Dad?" Now, Chris, true story, is on the brink of divorce, brings his wife to the Caribbean for a 5-day R&R. Sounds like this. Hey, you want to have sex? Want to get physical? Want to be close? Want to be intimate? They come back. I asked the wife if she had a good time. She says no. Chris is stunned. What do I do with Chris? It's absolutely true. You know what I did with Chris? I told him the Justin story. And I said, listen, there was a word for what I was doing with my 3-year-old boy. It's called parenting. It's what you deserved and did not get when you were little. Someone should have installed the sensitivity chip in you when you were 3, 4, 5. Because they didn't, you're acting like this now. You have to come to Boston and we'll install it in your 40s. But this is not your fault. And it's really important as a therapist that when I'm dealing with grandiose people, I both hold them accountable and I understand this is not their fault. You were set up to be the jerk you are today. Oh, you poor perpetrator. Let's help you out.
In fact, I think that raises an interesting issue with all the work on sort of generational trauma and early childhood trauma. Some people think people who do bad things use it as an excuse and say, it's not my fault, it's because the way I was parented.
Yeah.
So, how do you balance both acknowledging being set up to behave a certain way, but also taking responsibility?
You are not responsible for the way you were raised. You were a kid. So arbitrarily between 0 and 18, whatever they did to you is not your fault. From 18 on, what you do with the damage that's been incurred is your responsibility. I've been in therapy for over 30 years. I've been meditating for over 50 years. Um, I'll talk about my own life for a moment. I have a saying that I repeat often. I am the son of a depressed, angry father. He was the son of a depressed, angry father. I have 2 boys. They do not say that, and neither were their children. And that is the greatest achievement of my life. This is my responsibility to change the legacy.
Will you describe, in fact, what generational trauma is exactly, which I think you probably just did, but can you elaborate?
These things get passed on again through grandiosity. When my father was violent and when he was being physical with me, on the receiving end of that rage, as a little boy, I was disempowered, which leads to issues of shame. I felt unworthy. I felt bad, somehow defective. Why was I being punished? But he was also modeling for me, particularly same-sex parent. He was giving me the message. This is what a grown man looks like when he gets angry. This is okay. And in my early years, I was a rager. And I had to do healing work to get that out of my system. I'm not responsible for the modeling that I internalized. I am responsible for healing it and not inflicting it on the next generation.
Does generational trauma or trauma in general affect your genes? Is it more than just a behavioral thing? Can it actually have an impact on, say, your epigenetics, which are kind of the things that send messages to your DNA?
Yes, there's more and more research about the physical ramifications of trauma. In mice, for example, it literally changes the structure of your DNA, which means that you have to compensate for that even more in your parenting. But yeah, there's been a lot of research on, for example, children of Holocaust survivors. And more and more evidence is piling up that the generational trauma gets passed along not just emotionally but physically through our bodies, which makes it even more imperative that we parents do the work of our own recovery. One of the things I say, Katie, is the best gift you can give your kids is your own healing.
You call your book Us, Getting Past You and Me to Build a More Loving Relationship. And I think one of the central tenets of this book, Terry, is about getting past this notion that the individual is all important, something that we hear and has been emphasized in our society. Can you talk a little bit about shifting your kind of emphasis on individuality to connectivity?
Yeah, well, first of all, let's talk about our bodies since we're started with that in DNA and epigenetics. Physically, being in warm, intimate relationships is what we're designed for as a species. It's how our body works. It will literally put years on your life. Being socially isolated in one study was shown to be as physically damaging as smoking a pack and a half of cigarettes a day. Can you imagine? We are born to be connected. Young babies gravitate toward it's what we're designed for as a species. It's the only thing that will really make us happy. But in our individualistic culture, it's me, 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 my voice, my gratification, my standing up for myself. In the book, for example, I talk about what I call soft power or loving power, which is finding your voice, standing up for yourself, but doing it in a way that cherishes the person you're speaking to in the same breath. And that's brand new for our culture. I found my voice, stand back. How about I found my voice? Let me tell you what I want from you. And how about this? What could I give you to help me give that to me? Where do you hear that in this culture? And I love you. I know you want to come through for me. Let's work like a team to make this work for both of us. I believe that's really the next step for our culture.
It's like the line in Jerry Maguire, help me help you, right?
That's right.
And in fact, this is the foundation of relational life therapy, which really turns traditional modes of therapy upside down. How would you explain or describe RLT, relational life therapy?
Well, we break a lot of rules. We take sides. Not every couple is 50-50. We're perfectly capable of saying, Mr. Jones, you're a nut, and Mrs. Jones, you're an even bigger nut, and here's why. We tell the truth to people. We don't shilly shally around. We are taught as therapists to be nice. Nice is the curative factor. Nonsense. It's the combination of love and truth which moves people. We were taught as therapists first you form a trusting relationship with our clients and then you confront them with. In RLT, we form an alliance by confronting the difficult truths right out of the starting gate in a way that's so loving that the person trusts us more by dealing with what they're doing. You know, the trick is to hold the client in warm regard while we're dealing with difficult character traits or behavior. I have to say, at the end of so many sessions, not just me, but the thousands of people I've trained, sounds like something like this. Bill has been a liar and a cheater and a philanderer for 20 years. Bill, you're a decent guy. I had been with indecent men to the bone. They're called sociopaths. And man, they're cold. But you're not. You're warm. I can feel you. You're warm. You know what's so sad? I'm talking to a decent man who's behaved indecently for the last 20 years. Will you let me rescue the real you from this crap? Well, who says no to that?
You basically force people to own their shit. Is that right?
It's funny hearing that from you. Yes, that's what we do.
But I also know that you have viewed traditional therapy as sexist. And it's interesting because you're right. Most therapists listen, maybe they ask questions, but I think most clients or patients are craving some guidance.
Yeah,
And a lot of people who need help don't come up with the solution on their own. So you're
no.
not afraid to basically give your opinion. But I'm curious why you see most traditional therapy as sexist.
Well, RLT was born after I wrote I Don't Want to Talk About It. I started getting calls from around the country. And after a while, I said, hey, look, if you're crazy enough and you're desperate enough, come to Boston and work with me. And I would work with a couple for 2 intensive days. At the end of that time, you were back on track or getting a divorce. And over again, I say 3 out of 4 times it would be women dragging in men who were grandiose, womanizers, yellers, screamers, controllers, demanders, irresponsible, or shut down. Honey, we got to talk. Forget it. I'm out of the room.
Neglectful.
Yeah, and they needed help with the people. Don't people drag in people to couples therapy because they want the couples therapist to help them render their partners more relational. They're insufferable to live with. And therapists are like, oh, yeah, well, okay. You know, uh, Mrs. Jones, what's the problem? Well, he yells, screams, bullies, demands sex, pouts when he doesn't get it, and is tough on the kids. Okay, Mr. Jones, what's your problem? Well, she nags. Okay, you both have problems. Nonsense. She has a problem with him. He is egregious. Come on, let's get real. So, women across the board are insisting on more emotional intimacy from us guys than we raise boys and men to deliver is changing, but it's not changed. And rather than throw women under the bus, which most therapists do under the name of neutrality, I support them. In RLT, we say, okay, Harry, you're a statistic, man. There are hundreds of thousands of Harrys being dragged to offices just like mine. Let's roll up your sleeves and learn some of these relational skills. It's good for you, it's good for your body, and it's good for your kids. A lot of men who won't do this work for themselves or their wives will do it for their children. What kind of father did you have? What kind of father do you want to be? What is the legacy you want to pass on to your kids? Let me help you deliver. You need to learn a few things.
Is that what motivated you ultimately to change the behavior you had been taught and the behavior that was modeled for you by your father?
Yes. My stuff was so egregious. I don't think I would have had a successful adult relationship with a person without learning a few things. But what both cleaned Belinda and me up were the kids. We took it out on each other in our early years, but we were determined that we were not going to inflict violence on our kids. Yeah.
Do you think society would be more compassionate if we understood the roots of certain behavior? I'm thinking about Will Smith when he slapped Chris Rock.
Yeah.
Will Smith recently posted a video on Instagram apologizing, and a lot of people weren't having it. They were rejecting Will Smith apology, too little, too late. I mean, having read your work and having thought about some of these issues, I had more compassion for him
Hmm.
than perhaps other people might. How did you feel about that whole incident? I'm curious.
It's funny. I watched it live like millions of others around the world. I was shocked. I know a little bit about his background from his memoir. And what most people don't know is that Will Smith grew up watching his father be abusive to his mother. And there's no doubt in my mind that when he was witnessing this man go after his wife in public the way he did, which was horrible of Chris Rock to do, um, that little boy got triggered. All that helplessness and rage got triggered. And the adaptive child part of him went from shame to grandiosity, from helplessness to all powerful and attack. This is the dynamics of violence, from helplessness and shame into grandiosity and attack and then violence. And so I knew exactly what was going on with Will Smith. It doesn't excuse it. Uh, and I would like him to take more accountability and do some work so that that violence doesn't get passed on the way that it did. It so happens that I had a client who was in the audience, a movie star, and he said something to me that I thought was so beautiful. He said, "Just think if Will Smith had done the kind of work that I'm doing with you and had this stuff straightened out, if instead of stopping him, he walked over to Chris Rock in front of millions of people and given him a hug and said to him, hey, you know, there's a lot of bad stuff in the world right now. We don't need to be unkind to each other. Find another way to make us laugh." What a different, I mean, he would have got a standing ovation. What a different moment that moment could have been if instead of acting out the legacy of violence, he stopped it. That's our responsibility, to stop the legacy from being transmitted in our lives.
So when he made that joke about Jada Pinkett Smith's hair, if he had said, you know, that's upsetting to my wife, please don't make remarks like that.
Yeah, let's not be unkind. There's a lot of ways to have fun and be humorous without being cruel to somebody. Please stop.
Terry, I thought it was interesting when you write about not being able to fix your partner. And I think about Chris Martin's song, I Will Fix You. And that's probably the wrong message. You write, maturity comes when we tend to our inner children and don't inflict them on our partners to care for. How important is that?
Yeah, it's funny because the book is a critique of individualism, but we all have individual responsibility. I am responsible for my trauma and how I choose to handle it. It is not for you to heal me. You can love my little inner boy. You can give that little boy a hug. I can ask you to be supportive of me, but you're not the main caretaker of me, and you're not going to make me better. This is part of the traditional feminine role. I was on your old show, the Today Show, talking about the film A Beautiful Mind, and it's a great movie, but the idea that a woman can just love a man out of a mental health issue is a romantic nonsense. In point of fact, the real man, Graham Nash, got medication and needed it. So this idea that it's my job as your partner to love up that little boy or girl in you so that you behave better toward me is nonsense. It's your responsibility to take care of those children, not mine.
You also normalize marital hatred with your clients. You believe it will always show up even in the happiest of marriages. So are you saying that it's okay to hate your spouse every once in a while?
I am. That's exactly what I'm saying. There's a therapy trick. We teach people to say a part of me. A part of me hates a part of you. Goes down a little better than I hate your guts. But there are moments when, after 37 years, Belinda is annoying to me, and I just hate her, and she hates me. That's fine. I talk about I say it's true. For over 30 years now, I've been running around the world really talking about normal marital hatred. And I got to tell you, Katie, not one person has ever come backstage and said, "What do you mean by that?" It's
So
all
when
good.
does it, so it's okay to there is a thin line, it seems, between love and hate in a relationship. And you're saying it's okay to feel angry and even hate someone for a time. But when does it go from being okay to being a real problem?
It's so interesting. There's a difference between how you feel and how you behave. People get this wrong. And in our sort of English Germanic culture, we try and control our behavior by controlling our feelings. That's Don't legislate your feelings. Let yourself feel whatever you feel, but don't act it out. That's what's critical. I can allow myself to feel rage toward Belinda at times because I'm confident I'm not going to yell and scream and throw plates. Uh, Feelings are feelings, behaviors are behaviors. Feelings are natural, let them come. Behaviors are your responsibility, be civilized. Sigmund Freud once wrote, the first person who hurled a curse instead of a stick was the creator of civilization. So feel your feelings, but be civilized.
You're a solution oriented person, Terry. So I don't want time to pass without us discussing repair. So tell us how relationships can be repaired. And is there a way to even have productive disagreements or arguments?
Well, of course there are. And people fight. You know, all You mentioned the neglectful mom in the YouTube video. That's Dr. Ed Tronick, the still face experiment. And he's an infant observational researcher. He plunked cameras in front of mothers and infants. And what he saw, and I base my work on this, is an endless rhythm of harmony, disharmony, and repair. The baby is molded with just a noodle. And then there's gas or a noise or whatever. The baby freaks out, the mother freaks out, they're both mad at each other. And then the pacifier is accepted or whatever, and the baby goes back to molded again. Endless dance. It's like walking, balance, imbalance, rebalance. And this is the essential rhythm of all relationships. In our culture, we don't teach people how to get back to repair. We don't even acknowledge that it's necessary. A great relationship is all harmony, like a great body is a 20-year-old body, a great sex life is a 30-year-old sex life. Um, Real relationships are not just about unbroken harmony, they're about the whole dance of finding, losing, and finding again. When you're in the disharmony phase, it hurts. It can be raw. It can be dark. You can be asking yourself, oh man, what am I doing here? This is a great mistake. It's okay. The trick is to get back into the wise adult part of you that wants repair. See, the problem is when we move into disharmony, we get triggered and we move into our adaptive child. The adaptive child doesn't want repair. The adaptive child just wants self preservation, being right. And I talk about remembering love. When you're discombobulated, you can cultivate, you can build this muscle. You remember the person you're speaking to as someone you care about. The reason why you're speaking is to make things better. Get centered in the place that wants repair. And then there are particular skills that I go into. But the first skill is getting out of that trigger and into the part of you that remembers that it's in your interest to make repair with this person. Um, you don't really want to. I say this to my clients. Belinda and I have been at this 37 years, and we were wicked fighters early on. These days, we'll have a little one or the other will take a break. We almost always take this 15, 20 minutes distance. And then one or the other will come back and say something like this. Do you want to fight? I don't really want to. I don't want to. Can we get out of this? Honey, what do you need? And Belinda will go, well, you could really apologize for blah, blah, blah. And I go, you're right. I was a jerk, blah, blah. I'm sorry. And she'll go, okay, what do you need? And I'll go, well, you could take acknowledgement of blah, blah, blah. So, well, I blah'd. She'll leave two out, but okay, good enough. I'll take the blah. And then we're done. What do you want? Have some tea. What do you want? And what I tell people is what I'm thinking in that moment is how am I going to spend my time? Do I want to spend my evening fighting with this person, or would I rather cuddle on the couch and watch something cool on TV? And that's being in my right mind. I talk about keeping your eyes on the prize, keeping your wits about you. And that's coming out of that triggered adaptive child back into your centered adult self. Do I really want this fight? Or would it be better for me to make peace in this moment? You know, I'm delighted and proud that the book fans out and takes on larger social issues, even environmental issues. I want to say something about that before we go, but I say, we cannot bring peace to the Ukraine or to the Middle East, perhaps, but we can bring peace to our living rooms and our bedroom. Uh, Practice peace in our personal lives right now. Do you really want this fight? How about reaching for a better part of you?
I think about David Cassidy on his deathbed, who said his last words were, "So much wasted time."
Uh,
And I think that is such a profound thing to say. And I think that's what you're getting at. Do you really want to spend your time in disharmony? And how can you get back to some kind of peaceful and happy equilibrium with your partner?
yeah, and I say, see, when you're in your you and me consciousness, adaptive child, it's one wins, one loses. That's all nonsense. When you're in your wise adult, it's what are we going to do to make this work for both of us? Because, why? I don't talk about altruism. I talk about enlightened self-interest. It's in my interest to keep, I have these big burly guys and they say to me, well, why do I have to work so hard to please my wife? And I go, knock, knock. Hey, dummy, you live with her. Okay. Remember, that's why it's in your interest. Happy spouse, happy house. When you think from the us, you remember that it's in your interest to take. Here's how I say it: our relationships are our biosphere. We live inside of them, we breathe them. You can pollute your biosphere by being a brat and having a temper tantrum, but you'll breathe in that pollution by your partner's withdrawal or lack of sexuality. You're an ecosystem. Individualism says you're outside of the system, above it, and in control of it. That's crazy. You're inside the system, you depend upon it. Take good care of your ecosystem. You're not letting her win, you're taking care of the environment that you're in. I call that ecological humility. You're in it, take good care of it.
And you're actually doing what's best for you as a team when you fill your partner's needs instead of feel like it's you and me, it's us. And that's, I think, what you're trying to convey in this book. Bruce Springsteen wrote a very moving, really personal foreword, and
Yeah.
it actually made me cry. He
Oh,
writes, at 32, I hit an emotional wall and realized I was lost in a deep, dark forest, largely of my own making, without a map. So began 40 years of trying to find my way through the shadowed trees down to the river of a sustaining life. With help, I realized in early middle age that I was subject to a legacy that had been passed down from generation to generation in my Italian Irish family. You can see why he is such a poet. The foreword is so beautifully written. But tell me a little bit about that relationship, if you can, and why you turned to Bruce Springsteen to write the foreword of your book.
oh my gosh. Well, I will only say because he says in the forward that he and Patty have worked with me, and it's been a very beautiful relationship. I feel like I've learned at least as much as the two of them ever have. Uh, I'll tell you a funny story real quick. I was giving a talk at NYU in celebration of a great feminist psychologist, Carol Gilligan, a pal of mine. And a mutual friend said, I'm going to make your day. I said, okay. He said, there's a couple in New Jersey reading your first book. I don't want to talk about it out loud to each other every night. They're coming in to New York just to shake your hand and tell you that they're fans of yours. And I said, that's fantastic. That does make my day. And he said, no, that's not going to make your day. This is what's going to make your day. It's Bruce and Patty Springsteen. So we met, we had lunch, we connected, and they asked if they could come see me. And I've worked with him on and off for years. And he very courageously owns that and comes out with that in the forward. So
Just think if more well-known people kind of talked about this and talked about trying to understand their current behavior by looking at their past, how helpful and instructive that might be for other people. So hats off to Bruce Springsteen for talking about it.
yeah, I was particularly I've been fortunate enough to work with some stars, etc. But I was very moved to work with Bruce because he's always been a great hero of mine for everything that he represents. I'll tell you, my wife once said to me before I began working with him in a concert, we were watching him on stage, and she turned to me and said, Bruce Springsteen is probably the only man I'd ever leave you for. And I said, that's all right. He's probably the only man I'd ever leave you for.
So he's both of your free passes.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I know that you have an online workshop that accompanies this book. Tell me a little bit about that.
It's called the Us Workshop. You can get to it by just going to my website, my name, terryreal.com, TerryReal. It's a 6-week course, 90 minutes. I lecture and do live work with people. It's recorded at this point. Beautiful, beautiful live work with people who joined us. It's for the general public. It's for both couples and individuals on how to think relationally, live a relational life. And I use very particular new skills that come out of thinking this way that I really think are brand new.
Are there other ways that people can start, Terry, having these conversations? What would you say is step one to opening up these lines of communication, to exploring the forces that shape us as children and continue to impact our relationships as adults?
I think that we can all turn toward the adaptive child part of us and get to know it. In my work, I have people write letters to their adaptive child. Uh, First of all, and I'm not suggesting people do this, but just FYI, first of all, in the workshops, we do this. Thank you. First, thank you. You saved my butt. You kept me whole. Good for you. Brilliant little boy or girl. Well done. And then this is what you gave me. For me, you gave me spine. You gave me spunk. You gave me fire. For you being a fixer, sensitivity, EQ, an ability to read people, altruism. These are the things you cost me. You cost me intimacy. You cost me standing up for myself, or you cost me being able to stand down and yield, whatever. And then finally, I'm here now, the wise adult. I can take care of both of us. From now on, we're going to trade some of those old habits for some of these new ones. So get to know the adaptive child part of you. I talk about 5 losing strategies that are the hallmark of your adaptive child. And if you're listening, jot this down and ask yourself, what is your losing strategy profile? Being right, we're going to prove who's right and who's wrong here. Good luck with that. Controlling your partner, I'm going to get them to, which could be direct or it could be manipulative. Unbridled self-expression, big for psychotherapy. Let me vomit all over you about how I'm feeling. Retaliation, I'm going to hurt you the way you hurt me. Or withdrawal, I'm shutting down, leave me alone. Being right, control, ventilating, retaliating, or withdrawal. These are the hallmarks of your adaptive child. Get to know them. And next time you have an automatic impulse to act them out, take a breath, take a break. I'm a big fan of breaks. Take a walk around the block, get back into your adult mind, and then go back to your partner. Interrupt the automatic pattern.
And talk about this with the person you love so you can share each of your sort of triggering behaviors and kind of work on them together, not fix each other, but kind of understand at least each other, because I would imagine that's helpful too.
That's very helpful. And share your losing. Here's a parlor game. Do your losing profile and do your partners. Do what you imagine your partners is, and then the two of you can share them and compare notes. Look, I had a critical father. When Belinda's critical of me, I go right into my wounded child. On that little boy being yelled at. I have about 2 seconds worth of tolerance for that, and then my adaptive child comes in, and I'm ready to fight. Belinda knows that about me. And when she sees me get my back up, she can't help. It's not her obligation, but it's also smart. She'll literally reach in and touch my shoulder and go, "Hey, honey, I'm not fighting with you. Back down. We're not fighting." And I'll take a breath. And we can help each other that way, as long as we understand that it's voluntary and not obligatory.
Terry Real, your new book is called Us Getting Past You and Me to Build a More Loving Relationship. I highly recommend it because it's not only fascinating, but the stories you tell about your patients, I think, will give so many people something to relate to. So thank you for this conversation. And as I said, I encourage everyone to read your book and Bruce's forward, and to work on building a happier and healthier life for themselves today by understanding their past and the things that make them do what they do. So thank you, Terry. This was a lot of fun and really interesting.
Thank you, Katie. I don't need to tell you, you're an amazing interviewer. It's really nice to just be in your presence and hang out with you. It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thanks, Terry.